So if I had to pick a photo that pretty much summed up 21st century Western fascism, it would have to be this one. An IDF soldier standing in the completely destroyed ruins of a part of Gaza, and he has a rainbow flag, and written on it is "In the name of love." In the name of love, he has come to destroy millions of people's homes and try and completely wipe out a people and culture, all in the name of democracy, freedom, women's rights, and in this case, LGBT rights. Now, I've made a lot of videos on this channel talking about Western chauvinism, like this fascist belief that the West is superior, and often that does talk about like more liberal values, but not exclusively. And this use of the term Western civilization actually dates back to the 1930s, with a lot of Germans using this as well to justify all the awful stuff they did. But why I'm making this video and calling it something a bit different, I'm calling it woke fascism, is because a lot of the people who love that Western chauvinist stuff aren't so big on the LGBT rights. They're really not. A lot of them are very far-right conservatives, and a lot of them also don't like Jewish people as well, and by extension, they actually hate Israel for anti-Semitic reasons. So I don't think when I've been speaking about Western chauvinism, like overall, it's applicable to everything we're going to be talking about here. But there are a lot of people I've called Western chauvinists in the past, including many new atheist people like Sam Harris or people like Douglas Murray, who do fit in with what I'm going to talk about today, and that is woke fascism. Now, a lot of people in my comments like to remind me I'm using the word woke wrong. Well, words take on new meanings. Of course, I know the origins of the word woke. Obviously, it came out of African American communities during the civil rights movement, talking about, you know, staying woke to injustice, staying woke generally. And honestly, I would use the word woke to describe myself in many ways just because of the way conservatives use it. But also the way it's kind of been like changed by conservatives is to mean many things. And we've all seen those viral videos of conservatives who cannot even explain what woke means.
Would you mind defining woke? Because it's come up a couple times and I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
So, I mean, woke is sort of the idea that this is going to be one of those moments that goes viral.
Because for a lot of them, there is no concrete definition. It just means anything what they perceive to be left-wing and stuff, right? But I also believe the way it used to be used in this way by conservatives was mainly to attack liberal identity politics, more so like corporate identity politics and corporate liberalism. And calling this stuff woke fascism is kind of using it in like that context, right? In terms of, I'm describing people who will say, if you support women's rights and LGBT rights, then you must support everything Israel is doing, because that is a country legally which has better LGBT rights and better women's rights than, I don't know, places governed by the Palestinian Authority or Hamas. And also things like passing laws against anti-Semitic speech, which by design is actually trying to limit any criticism of the Israeli government. And in the past, I've called it woke washing. In the past, loads of people have called it pinkwashing. I made videos on it years ago about Israeli pinkwashing, and we're going to talk about that today as well. And it's just like how fascism is arriving in the West now. You have a Democratic president like Joe Biden basically encouraging the LAPD and NYPD to go into peaceful protests and crack down on them, with the liberal media all calling these people anti-Semitic and cheering on their brutalization by like an actual fascist police force. Like, most police in America aren't just fascist because they joined the police. The overwhelming majority of cops support the Republican Party and have zero problem with anti-Semitism. As we know, a lot of police forces in America actually train in Israel, or at least get trained by IDF soldiers, so we have that connection there nicely, and they will happily crack down on any protest they think threatens their buddies over in Israel. So when we use the term fascism, people just think it's going to be the same thing as the 1930s, or it's going to be like Franco's Spain or something like that. It's going to look how it looked before. But no, it won't. Sometimes fascism will come in, I guess, the cloak of liberalism. And that's why that leftist saying of scratch a liberal and a fascist bleeds has always been popular and always been right, because at the end of the day, liberals will go along with fascism rather than give in to leftism. And that's why it's important to be a leftist, so you can criticize this stuff from the left and realize also that liberals doing this, like Joe Biden and certain groups in Israel, using these like woke liberal identity politics to justify terrible things, is actually bad overall. Because like with that Israeli soldier with the rainbow flag, loads of people who don't support that will see that and be like, oh, is this what LGBT rights is about then? Going in and destroying a whole territory because they think they're superior to you and more enlightened than you. And also, we see this exact same mindset in Europe in regards to the refugee crisis, in which so many people have been saying, we must keep them out because they're illiberal and they'll destroy our culture. And it's actually, you know, pro-women and pro-LGBT to be super xenophobic and start crackdowns against refugees and migrants because they might not actually support the same stuff as us. Therefore, we will use that as an excuse to do terrible things to them. Now, to start with, I'm going to talk about like Sam Harris and stuff for a tiny bit. So I've used this clip a lot in the past, and he was just talking about like Douglas Murray and how they're going to have a nice chat and stuff. But he basically said this as well, talking about Europe being overrun by illiberal people and like America's in a better place because it doesn't face the same problems in terms of refugees that Europe does, and everyone should be worried about this. And this was back in 2018.
Douglas and I spent a lot of time in this podcast, certainly most of the time, talking about the situation in Europe with respect to immigration and Islam and the social attitudes in the Muslim community that are at odds with values that really should be, really must be non-negotiable, like free speech and women's rights and gay rights. And in particular, we're worried about protecting them from many of the illiberal people who have been pouring into Europe. In this one, we more or less fully agree on what we're against. And if you think that puts the matter too strongly, you haven't read Douglas's book, and you probably haven't been paying much attention to what's been happening in Europe. And if you think one has to be a fan of Trump in order to worry about this, well, then you haven't been paying attention to this podcast. But on the topic of Trump, Trump just gave a speech in Poland where he said, and I quote, "The fundamental question of our time is whether the West has the will to survive. Do we have the confidence in our values to defend them at any cost? Do we have enough respect for our citizens to protect our borders? Do we have the desire and the courage to preserve our civilization in the face of those who would subvert or destroy it?" End quote. And while I find abundant fault with the messenger, as you know, I can't find fault with that particular message. And the fact that liberals can't seem to see what's at stake here, the fact that they are embarrassed to defend, quote, Western values, as though that were synonymous with racism, or the legacy of colonialism, or xenophobia, or a lack of compassion, that is making liberalism politically defunct at this point. And that increasingly worries me. And happily in the United States, we are in a better situation demographically and with respect to immigration and just geographically. And that has implications for immigration. But one cannot be cheerful about what's been happening in Europe.
So some of you who are a bit younger might not really realize the overturn shift in regards to this stuff that has happened over the last decade. So the language like this about stopping like migrants and refugees flooding into Europe, otherwise they'll just destroy Europe, right? That was something that was recognized as like a more fringe thing politically. You had like Geert Wilders, obviously, in the Netherlands. He was seen as like a fringe candidate with like Donald Trump before Donald Trump was president. Then you had people in the UK, like with UKIP. You had all these different things. And despite obviously Muslims being demonized in the West very, very heavily for the last 2 decades and more, this language was more explicit on the far right. But in 2024, it is the language of like both major political parties. Across Europe, the people who were seen as fringe have actually used this issue to get into power. And they use this language about protecting women, protecting liberalism, protecting the West to basically enact fascist policies against asylum seekers. And it's something that's going to continue because a lot of Western governments don't want to actually deal with the issue, right? They don't want to deal with the issues that cause people to come seek asylum in Europe, which is often caused by, Western imperialism, and they don't want humane solutions to refugees seeking asylum in Europe. So expect this to continue, and expect this to continue with the language of, we need to protect Western values, whatever the hell that means. And just like good old liberalism, it's totally devoid of class analysis. So I'm meant to think that the elite in the UK, when they enact fascist, xenophobic policies against refugees, they're protecting some sort of shared values I have with them, right? I have with billionaires and like the hedge fund manager, Prime Minister of the UK, who nearly is a billionaire himself. I have more in common with that guy than I do with an asylum seeker. That's what they try and convince you, because liberals hate class analysis, because you'd realise you have more in common with a refugee fleeing to the UK, and you're closer to being that guy than you are to being like a Tory MP or the Tory Prime Minister, right? So essentially they use this woke washing, they use this culture war to convince you it's actually in your interests to support their xenophobic policies to ensure the survival of some sort of made up set of values, which, you know, for someone like myself, left-wing person in the UK, communist in the UK, I don't share like Western values with the Tory government. What is the Western values, you know, supporting Israel no matter what? The Western values of being terrible to asylum seekers, the Western values of destroying the country in the name of capitalism, destroying all the social safety nets, destroying socialist programs like the NHS. Do I really share values of those people? Of course I don't, right? It's just brainwashing, and, you know, what fascism does well is just plays on your fears, plays on this cultural war to try and convince ourselves we actually are better off if they lead us and enact these fascist policies. Now, that is in terms of the refugee crisis in Europe. That's been going on for about 9 years now. But also this same language is now being used in terms of the Israeli stuff. Now, a lot of people have been mocking Queers for Palestine. And they're like, well, try going to Palestine then. Try going, because they don't accept gay people. And actually destroying Gaza is actually a good way to save gay people, because we must preserve the Israeli state, which sees more equality for gay people. But also, if you accept gay people, you must accept, no matter what country you're looking at, despite its record on LGBT rights, there's surely a lot of gay people there then. They might be in the closet, but there's surely a lot of them there. So what have you just done to them? You haven't saved them, have you? They're dead. They're fleeing. And you're doing this with a rainbow flag saying you're saving LGBT people. And there was actually, you know, an article written about the mindset of one of these guys. So we have this first picture, but here's another article from back in October. A gay Israeli soldier says he's going to fly the LGBTQ+ flag in his tank. While fighting, Yoav Atzmoni, 31, was called up to serve in the IDF. He told Insider that he's worried that a Hamas victory could set Israel's progress on LGBTQ+ rights back several decades. I won't let them bring me back into the closet. Atzmoni says he believes the IDF is the protector of Israel's democracy and LGBTQ+ rights, and the flag represents that. During previous trips to Jordan and Egypt, he noticed how severely LGBTQ+ rights were limited. Israel, however, has made strides in LGBTQ rights and protections over the past 6 decades, including recognizing same-sex marriages performed abroad in 2006 and adopting children through surrogacy in 2020. Just don't ask them if you can get married in Israel. Israel's defense ministry recently formally recognized same-sex couples' rights to the same benefits as other families of dead IDF soldiers. And then, ironically, he goes on to talk about how they're scared of like Netanyahu's government for being so far right. So if you're so scared of Netanyahu's takeover of Israeli politics, which, you know, he basically has taken over Israeli politics for the last 20 years, then why are you fighting his war? But again, that's just the brainwashing, isn't it? Because he recognizes that Netanyahu and his government are actually a threat to his rights. but he's still going along with the war because they've convinced him that Palestinians are more of a threat to his rights than the actual Israeli government. And for me, that perfectly encapsulates how people are brainwashed by woke fascism. And it's the same thing happening in regards to refugees. They say they're more of a threat to you than us. The problems of your life are actually from asylum seekers, not from your government. And the same thing here. Go fight a war for me. Go fight a war for a government that doesn't actually like you. Go fight a war for a prime minister and his really right-wing government who actually don't like gay people to protect Israel's gay people. Doesn't make sense, does it? And yeah, I'm not saying that groups like Hamas like gay people, but how does this help LGBT rights at all? Palestinians are just going to see an Israeli soldier destroying their home, waving a rainbow flag, while thousands of LGBT Palestinians also suffer at the hands of your invasion. How does this help at all? But again, that is how effective the propaganda is. Go along and do fascism and fight a war for a fascist government to protect, LGBT rights. Even reading that article, you're just like, this is just bizarre when he recognizes Netanyahu's a threat to his rights, but still does his bidding. And Israeli tourism uses this a lot. They have Tel Aviv Pride. We're the only place in the Middle East where you can be LGBT safely. But in a video on this, I also read an account of a Palestinian lesbian who was convinced by this propaganda, went to go to university in Israel, but then gay Israelis in her community started trying to make her change her name because they accepted her as a lesbian woman. They didn't accept her as a Palestinian. And of course, you can have progress on LGBT rights without, building an apartheid colony in the Middle East and keeping a group of people in prison and using your progressive stance on LGBT rights comparatively to countries in the region to keep these people essentially locked up in this tiny bit of territory and justify all the terrible things you do to them. Although it might look different now because, of course, LGBT people have been persecuted historically by fascists, the new 21st century fascism of the establishment is using this to justify all the terrible stuff they do. Now let's move a bit further. Now let's talk about anti-racism and the fight against anti-Semitism, which to most good people is something we can agree on. I've spent so much time on this channel both calling out Israel and being an anti-Zionist, but also making so many videos which fight against anti-Semitism and, point out so much fascist stuff in our society. I even made a video talking about anti-Semitic people who are against Israel and do not follow them on social media, don't boost their posts, all that stuff, because if you are a principled person who fights against injustice in the world, you can easily be against anti-Semitism and be against the colonial ideology of Zionism. It's really, really not hard. But don't worry, America and other countries are actually taking people's good nature, people who don't want to be racist or anti-Semitic, and they're weaponizing it to attack free speech. And you guys probably saw this with the college campus protests, but at the same time, they were passing laws in Congress about the definition of anti-Semitism in school. And like I said with the LGBT stuff, conflating this stuff, colonialism with LGBT rights, and then you got something here where you're conflating anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, you're really doing damage to the cause of fighting against anti-Semitism, because you're saying some of the strongest fighters against anti-Semitism, like myself and millions like me and loads of Jewish people who have the same politics as me as well, by the way, you're saying to them you're actually anti-Semites because you're against Israel. But let's read the controversy around this bill. So in the House last week, the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act in the House passed last week on a 320 to 91 vote. So what does the bill say? The legislation would, for the first time, enshrine a definition of anti-Semitism into federal law by adopting wording settled upon in 2016 by the IHRA, a group of 35 member countries that includes the US and Israel and the UK, I believe. The definition could then be used for enforcement of federal anti-discrimination laws on college campuses. The intergovernmental organization, founded in 1998 to increase and promote education, adopted legally non-binding language in 2016 that defines anti-Semitism as a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Examples of the definition's application include accusing Jews as a people of being responsible for real or imagined wrongdoing committed by a single Jewish person or group, and making dehumanizing and demonizing or stereotypical allegations about Jews as such or the power of Jews as a collective. But the definition also includes denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, claiming that Israel's existence is a racist endeavor, and drawing comparisons between Israeli policy and the policies of the fascists in Germany in the 30s and 40s. The bill that passed Congress would instruct the Department of Education to take into consideration the definition of anti-Semitism as part of the department's assessment on whether the practice was motivated by anti-Semitic intent. When investigating allegations of discrimination against Jewish students on college campuses, if universities fail to restrict statements covered by the definition, they could risk having their federal funds withheld. So the congressmen who passed this say it's all about protecting Jewish students, and a spokesperson for the ADL said in a statement the group supports the act, which reinforces the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism in addressing campus harassment and discrimination. The spokesperson added that Congress must take comprehensive approaches to fighting anti-Semitism and urges swift passage of the act. So essentially, it's giving even more justification for the crackdown on the college encampment, saying that yes, if you deny Jewish people the right to their homeland, if you don't support Zionism, and if you equate their actions to the actions of fascists in Germany, then actually you are being anti-Semitic. And if colleges start saying we're not going to follow that, then the government can take away your funding. And also they can use it to, as they have been doing, deport students, expel students, all this stuff. And like I said, because it's woke fascism, you are not allowed to criticize your university's involvement with the Israeli war machine, because that's what a lot of these groups are calling for. Stop investing in Israeli companies or anything affiliated with the Israeli government. And it's very clear what a lot of their goals are, but even if they didn't have a goal, even if it was like a sporadic protest just against the Israeli government, that's totally fine as well. And if you believe in free speech, that should be fine. And if you actually are a fighter against anti-Semitism, you can see how this is pretty much purely designed to censor criticism of Israel. So in the US now, your tax money is funding what Israel are doing, and you're not allowed to criticize it if you're a college student as well. And the ADL was another great example of a group that doesn't actually care about this stuff. They just care about supporting Israel, because we called out Elon Musk for the spread of anti-Semitism on Twitter, which is insane at the moment, by the way. Like, rare occasions I go on, I see videos of the Germans in the 30s, people posting them and saying these guys were misunderstood, and it's getting like 100,000 likes and stuff. Like, it's absolutely cooked, the whole website. But after a meeting with Elon Musk, who also supports Israel, right, they then say that he's taken great steps to fighting anti-Semitism on the platform, which has literally become like a haven for this stuff. It is rampant absolutely everywhere because their priorities aren't fighting anti-Semitism. This law isn't designed to fight anti-Semitism. That's just the woke language they use to enact fascist policies designed to crush dissent. And of course, you have people in the NYPD, like the heads of the NYPD, like a very fascist organization, calling these student protesters, with Jews who number among them, anti-Semite fascists. So that's why they should go crack their skulls, right? And also, the media runs cover for this as well. So an article by Rami G. Kahuri, Watching the Watchdogs, How US Media Weaponized Campus Protest Coverage. The American mainstream media has widely condemned students and accused them of using hate speech and hate symbols, advocating for Israel's destruction, resorting to anti-Semitic slurs, and threatening and frightening Jewish students. Everywhere they look in the student protest encampments, the media oracles have seen anti-Semites at work and called them fascist mobs in the making. MSNBC's Morning Joe show, reportedly a Biden favorite, is a glaring example of systematically biased TV programming. One of its hosts, Joe Scarborough, old GOP congressman, claimed that the students want to wipe out all the Jews, they are Hamas on college campuses, and they are not helping those who want to fight fascism in America. His co-host, Mika Brzezinski, whose dad was President Carter's national security advisor, said that the campus protest looked like Jan 6th. Obviously, you had like that viral CNN clip going around, also demonizing the protesters as anti-Semites. And apart from a few fringe cases, which is bound to happen and stuff like this, I really haven't seen any great examples of this horrible anti-Semitism on college campuses. And again, it's woke fascism, isn't it? These people, and these racists, by the way, Joe Scarborough, Mika Brzezinski, the Speaker of the House for the Republican side, talking about anti-Semitism, like, in these college campuses, when they're all, like, massive racists. Same with Joe Biden as well. It just blows my mind in that the people who are racist, the people that are anti-Semitic, are telling the people who are fighting against Zionism, and for the most part aren't anti-Semitic, that they are actually fascists, anti-Semites, and you must send police into a university to crack their skulls to stop this because they're making Jewish students feel unsafe. These are very, very peaceful protests, far more peaceful than the protests on college campuses against the Vietnam War, but they're being framed like it's some sort of fascist mob, like beating up Jewish students and destroying the campus when it's not. But this is how fascism is coming for us under, like, the liberal establishment. Joe Biden's the president. In New York, it's completely run by the Democrats. Democratic governor, Democratic mayor. Most of the Congress people are Democrats. 2 Democratic senators, and they're still going to send the NYPD fascists with military surplus and a massive inflated budget to come crack your skull if you say, oh yeah, my university and my government shouldn't be funding the worst crime of this century. And while they crack your skull, they will be calling you an anti-Semite racist. So fascism can look very, very different. And the current flavour we're getting across Europe, the European Union and America, is woke fascism, using these, like, so-called Western values of progressivism to demonize Muslims. And let's also remember, their version of their caricature of Muslim is extremely racist, because people often say to me when I make these videos, Islam is not a race, I cannot be racist to a Muslim. But that's the problem. Muslim has been racialized, because it doesn't matter if you believe in Islam or not. If you were born in what they perceive to be as a Muslim country and you're a refugee, you're a Muslim, right? It doesn't matter what you actually believe. When we think of Muslim, most people think of like an Arab or a Central Asian. They might imagine like a Taliban fighter or something, right? Because of the media racialization, you don't typically picture a Bosnian, a Thai, or a Malaysian Muslim, do you? You picture a Bangladeshi, you picture an Arab, you picture a Central Asian, and you know it's framed as this horde of brown people essentially coming to Europe and destroying it. And the dehumanization of Muslims has been going on and has ramped up, obviously, over the last 20 years, but goes in cycles where now, because of what Israel are doing, it's coming up again, where basically, and we've known this for a long time, the Western liberal establishment does not see Muslim lives as equal. They see Muslims as subhuman, and they also see Muslims as people who deserve to have violence done onto them. And that's why so many people, even like new atheists who you think with atheists they'd be against Zionism more, they support them doing these terrible things. Because woke fascism is mostly centered on backwards Islam as they see it, and backwards Muslims. And as an atheist, I got no love for organized religion. I got no love for Islam at all. But I can also see when the liberal establishment and the Western establishment are obviously racializing a religion and using this to enact fascist policies, whether that be hardline xenophobic immigration and refugee policies, or massive support for Israel under the guise of we must protect a tolerant and progressive and decent society from these Muslim barbarians. And that's where we're at in 2024. But anyway, that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.